The sun scorched the dusty plains, turning the horizon into a molten blur of gold and orange. Dust swirled around the old wooden fence posts like restless spirits, and the wind carried the faint scent of smoke and horses. In the distance, the sound of hooves thudded against the parched earth. Samuel McCoy, the rancher, stood with his broad-brimmed hat pulled low, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was a man used to giving orders, his hands rough from years of handling cattle, his face lined with sun and responsibility. The townsfolk whispered his name with a mixture of fear and respect. He didn't ask for much, but he expected payment when he gave his word. A wagon creaked to a halt outside the corral, and a young woman stepped down, her dress billowing around her boots. She carried herself with an air of desperate resolve, and there was a defiance in her eyes that reminded Samuel of the storms that swept across the prairie, untamed and unstoppable. "You paid for me, now do it," she said, her voice steady but trembling with tension. Samuel's jaw tightened. He had been warned about this girl, a drifter with a past shrouded in shadows, someone who had survived the lawless stretches between towns by wit and nerve alone. He didn't flinch. "I said I'd handle it," he replied, his voice low, calm, but carrying the weight of authority. He mounted his horse, the leather creaking under him, and gestured for her to follow. The girl climbed into the saddle behind him, gripping the edges of the saddle horn as the horse started its steady trot. The road ahead was long, and the sun painted everything in fiery streaks, as if the land itself bore witness to what was about to happen. They rode for hours, passing windmills that creaked under the relentless sun, abandoned shacks with peeling paint, and fields dotted with wildflowers that seemed to laugh at the harshness around them. Samuel remained silent, his mind fixed on the task he had promised to fulfill. The girl's hands occasionally brushed his, hesitant and searching for reassurance, but he made no move, for he believed actions spoke louder than touch. As dusk approached, they reached a small canyon where a gang of outlaws had taken refuge, men who had terrorized nearby settlements and left families trembling in fear. Samuel dismounted, his spurs jingling, and the girl followed, her boots crunching against the gravel. The outlaws sneered, unaware of the storm they were about to face. Samuel's hand rested near his holster, calm, deliberate, the kind of man who didn't need to shout to command attention. "What's this?" "Another fool thinking he can take us," the leader spat, a scar cutting across his cheek. Samuel's eyes met his, unwavering. "I've been paid to handle this," he said simply, and the words carried a deadly promise. In the blink of an eye, the tension erupted. Gunfire cracked, echoing against the canyon walls. Dust and smoke mingled in the air as men fell, some screaming, some silent, but all defeated by Samuel's precision. The girl watched, wide-eyed, as the lawless men were taken down, each shot calculated, each movement controlled. When the last man dropped, the canyon fell silent except for the wind whistling through the rocks. The girl exhaled, trembling, and Samuel turned to her. "It's done," he said, his voice steady, almost gentle in contrast to the violence that had just occurred. She slid off the horse, unsteady, and he offered her a hand. Her fingers brushed his, fleeting, but it spoke volumes of trust earned in the crucible of danger. She looked at him, searching his face for something more than the rugged exterior, and for a moment, he allowed himself to meet her gaze fully. There was a flicker of something unsaid between them, a recognition that their lives had changed in ways neither could have predicted. They rode back to the ranch as night swallowed the plains, the stars emerging like distant fires. Samuel's mind wandered, unusually restless, thinking about the girl who had dared challenge him, who had demanded more than just protection. She had come into his life like a sudden wind, unpredictable and fierce. And somewhere deep down, he realized that what he had done today wasn't just about payment. It was about a future neither of them had anticipated, a life that might begin right here, under the wide-open sky of the West. The next morning, the ranch was quiet, except for the lowing of cattle and the distant crowing of roosters. The girl, whose name Samuel now knew was Clara, moved through the barn with a grace that belied the chaos of the day before. She was no stranger to hard work, she lifted bales of hay with ease, fed the horses, and even mended a fence with hands that had clearly known labor before. Samuel watched from the porch, his eyes scanning her movements, not with judgment, but with an unfamiliar sense of admiration. He had dealt with many people over the years, but Clara had a spark he couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, life on the ranch settled into an uneasy rhythm. Samuel went about his business, tending the herd, fixing broken gates, and ensuring the land remained under control. Clara shadowed him, learning quickly, always asking questions, always observing. She didn't just want to survive, she wanted to understand, to be part of something more than just a fleeting existence. Samuel had seen that determination before, in men who had faced death and returned stronger. Seeing it in a woman, he found himself surprised by a sense he hadn't felt in years, something softer, something tethered not to survival but to connection. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Samuel found Clara sitting on the porch steps, a quiet worry etched across her face. "You're thinking about the past," he said, settling next to her. Clara nodded, her eyes distant. "It's not just the past," she murmured. "It's what comes next. You did all this for me, but what about you? Don't you ever think about what you want?" Samuel turned his gaze to the sky, considering her words. He had always thought of the land, the ranch, the herd, his duties consumed him. But now, looking at Clara, he realized he had been thinking about something more than just survival. He had been thinking about her. Their hands brushed, almost by accident, and the contact lingered. There was a silence between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Samuel cleared his throat. "I've been alone for a long time," he said finally. "I built this place, fought for it, and thought that was enough. But, you've changed that. I can't explain it, but," he trailed off, unsure of how to put into words the feelings that had grown so quickly, so unexpectedly. Clara leaned into him slightly, her hand finding his, firm and trusting. "Sometimes, the right kind of trouble comes into your life," she said softly. "And it's worth it." Weeks passed, and the bond between them deepened. They shared quiet dinners, long rides across the plains, and conversations that stretched into the night. Samuel began to realize that Clara wasn't just a survivor, she was someone who could match his strength, challenge him, and yet soften the edges of his hardened heart. The townsfolk noticed the change too. The once solitary rancher now had a companion, someone who rode beside him, not behind him, someone whose laughter echoed across the fields in the late afternoon sun. It was during the spring roundup that Samuel finally understood that life had shifted irrevocably. He watched Clara maneuver the herd with skill and determination, her hair whipping in the wind, and he felt a surge of pride in something more intimate, something that settled deep in his chest. After the work was done, as they rode back under a sky streaked with twilight, Samuel spoke with certainty he hadn't felt before. "Clara, stay. Not just here on the ranch, stay with me. Let's build a life together." Clara's eyes glistened, a mix of surprise and joy. "I thought you'd never ask," she whispered. They returned to the ranch, not as a rancher and a drifter, but as partners, bound by respect, shared trials, and the wild promise of the West. The land stretched endlessly before them, a canvas of opportunity and adventure. Samuel had kept his word, as he always did, but in doing so, he had gained something far greater than payment or reputation. He had gained a companion, a partner, and in the quiet moments beneath the open sky, he realized that the harsh world of the West could still offer something tender, something enduring, and something that could be called home.